Okay.
Okay. All right, class. Well, we have another super exciting guest today. Today's special guest is a playwright, screenwriter, director, and film producer, Catherine Ann Taylor. Kat Ann graduated from Tulane University with a major in English and General Theater. She was president of the Tulane English Honor Society and the Tulane Performing Arts Society. Since graduating, Kat has written, directed, and produced 2 short films called What She Told Me and Thin Slicing. She's taken 3 plays to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in Scotland, was a judge at the Adelaide Fringe Festival in Australia, and has worked for a Broadway producer in New York City while directing 6 one-act plays and working the red carpet at the Tribeca Film Festival. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk playwriting and screenwriting with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Just a side fun note, you know the Kat's a director because she spent like 10 minutes trying to perfect her frame.
I did. I wanted it to look good.
It looks very good. All right, Kat, so the first thing I want to ask you is how you learned to write plays and screenplays. Did you take classes in college or did you kind of teach yourself?
You know, I really did sort of teach myself. I never wrote any plays or screenplays in college. I only wrote short stories, and I also worked for the Tulane Hullabaloo, the Tulane newspaper. So, and of course, you know, writing essays for all my liberal arts classes.
Right.
So that was something I really got into out of necessity because I couldn't find scripts that were very low budget, like, you know, for theater, like 1 location, you know, 2 characters, something that's easy to produce on your own with basically, you know, no budget. So once I was looking around and I just couldn't find scripts that I liked that were, you know, easy to produce. So I said, I'm just going to have to start writing them myself. And so that's kind of how that all started. I started doing that once I moved to New York in 2018.
Wow. So what resources did you kind of turn to help teach yourself?
To help teach myself, gosh. Well, when I was still in Louisiana, so I stayed in Louisiana for an extra year after school, and I just sort of moved more into film at that point because I was all theater directing in college. And I said, I just want to learn more about the film industry because maybe my projects could stop going away. So, you know, they they disappear and I wanted them to be preserved. So while I was still living in New Orleans, I took a screenwriting class with someone in Louisiana. It's Chuck Bush. He's a, you know, producer in Louisiana. So he had a 3-day screenwriting class in Baton Rouge, like sort of a boot camp. And so I took that class, and that was a great foundation for me just to understand the basics of, you know, if you want to write a feature film, you know, the inciting incident has to happen usually by page, you know, X page in the script, things like that. So that was a great way to start. I tend to build my own scripts just from dialogue. So mine, you know, you can have really dialogue-fueled scripts, character-based, or more plot-fueled, which, you know, action-adventure. So mine tend to be much more dialogue-based.
Nice.
Yeah.
Usually what I like to watch anyway. I'm such a sucker for dialogue, especially I'm watching The West Wing right now with Aaron Sorkin, and I'm just in awe every time I watch anything of his dialogue skills. They're incredible. So tell me about the process of writing your first film, What She Told Me. Was this the first script you'd ever written?
Yes. So I wrote a play when I was in high school, but you know, other than that, there was really nothing else. I had written, it was I want to say like a 4-page short story that I had written for a creative writing class in college. And I said, I had a friend who was a cinematographer, and he said, well, I just want to shoot something. Let's just shoot something. And I thought, well, if we want to do it fast, because I was actually moving out of New Orleans within the month, I thought it would be better to use something that I've already polished and just adapt it than to write something totally new on a time crunch.
Mm-hmm.
That the plot is already, I've fully thought out the plot, there's not going to be any plot holes last minute that we find. So I basically just tried to find, it's interesting with a short story because short stories are very descriptive. So I had to write in a lot of voiceovers. So there are voiceovers that allow me to kind of infuse the description from the story because you can't get that any other way. So you can overlay that onto a visual, and I think that's really the best way to adapt a short story because there's not typically that much dialogue you're describing. So I found the dialogue and put that in there, and then I added in the voiceovers as well. So essentially, you're just using almost the exact sentences from the short story and, layering them in, direction and then dialogue.
Absolutely. And, I had seen a rough cut of what she told me, and I noticed, there's very minimal dialogue. And what's so cool is that it's very heavy performance based. You had two extremely talented young actresses. And so when you were writing it, or actually when you were adapting it from a short story to a script, did you have a clear idea of how you wanted those performances to go?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I did. And I'm usually pretty specific when I direct. Like I kind of already know what I want. I definitely want, like I love to pose questions to actors and say, what do you think the character is thinking at this point or wants out of this situation? And I think sometimes that can be very much up to the actor to interpret. And I'm like, you don't even need to tell me what you think their backstory is or what's going on with them. That can just be for you. And I'll say, maybe try it 2 different ways. And that gives them some room for creativity. And sometimes I definitely always want to leave that open for actors because like they're very much artists and it's a collaboration. And I always learn something new when I try to open it up. So even though I definitely have like a specific vision, I'm always pleasantly surprised when I try to let go a little bit and leave it up to them.
And, speaking of dialogue, there's a rhythm to dialogue that is always really interesting to me. Like one of the plays, the excerpts that I'm having students read is Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, where, that opening scene is just so much about timing and the speed and the comedic timing of it. And then, there are other works where it's much more about the pauses and the beats in between the lines that can often say more than the lines themselves. And so do you think about that when you're writing? Do you think about those beats and pauses and how to make them resonate?
I do. I had some great professors at Tulane, and they would always talk about all of that. There was one professor, and he would say, there's power in silence and stillness.
Ooh, that's good.
It's really good. And so when you're directing and when you're writing as well, because you're actually directing as a writer, you're directing on the page.
Exactly.
You're trying to think about what will keep the audience hooked. And I always say as a director, if I have time to uncross my legs, then there's a weak spot in the performance. And so I think, sometimes if you're hearing a lot of dialogue, you tend to glaze, like, you zone out as an audience member. So if there is like a really intense like pause, it brings you back in. And, at a very base level, you're just trying to think like, how can I keep their attention?
Definitely. So in your own words, what makes screenwriting or playwriting different from, you said you write short stories, specifically in the actual writing process, and obviously the formatting is very different. So tell us a little bit about some of those differences.
That, I would say in adapting this last play, Thin Slicing, to the screen, it was all about where can I cut dialogue and just have them show, give an expression. So they always say, how can you show instead of tell?
Mm-hmm.
So it was all about cutting down the dialogue, using screen description, like where is the camera looking, things like that. If you can cut down on the words, because it really is a much more visual medium, I guess that's the key. So, but it was funny because we ended up adding some dialogue back in. So you kind of just never know. I'm very much, more of like, have you seen Fleabag with Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
Yeah.
Yes. So, she's very much, her TV show, Fleabag, started out as a one-woman show at the Edinburgh Fringe. And if you look at some of the clips of her, of that show, it's long, it's very wordy, it's very dialogue heavy. So I feel like as a screenwriter or playwrights are better suited to television because that's so much more of a dialogue-based medium. Whereas some of the, great films that you watch, there's so much just visual and silence, and my brain just doesn't think that way. And I'm trying to force it to think that way.
Absolutely. And that kind of reminds me too of, A Quiet Place, and how, I had when I was, I think I was an undergraduate, I had a theater professor, do an assignment where he said, write a short play without any words. And as somebody who loves dialogue, that was just like the rug being pulled out from under me. I was like, oh my goodness, how do you tell something just purely visual? But it was one of the most fun projects that I got to work on. And I ended up doing something with like a lot of music and dance as a way to tell a story. And so that was, one thing that I thought was exactly what you were talking about, the show don't tell rule. I mean, that is key because it is a visual medium and you have to think, what can you tell without words almost? And you make a great point about playwrights being able to get away with a lot more dialogue because of that confined space, and you're more actor driven. So that was another question I was going to ask you, is between your play version of Thin Slicing and your screen version of Thin Slicing, how did locations drive the dialogue and the action? Because you are confined by a stage in one, and then the other you're confined by like a real working location. So how did that work for you?
Oh, yes. Oh, that's a great question. So I had written that play very much for, just a black box theater. This play, it's about a guy and a girl who they're in the same friend group, and they both end up outside of the bar. They're on like a birthday night out for like a loose acquaintance friend group. They're not really friends. They know the guy whose birthday it is from different areas of life. And so they start out very much like hating each other. And by the end of it, they've shared some of their like vulnerabilities. And they basically, by the end, you're like, are they falling in love? Are they going to fall in love? At the end of 20 minutes. So you just need two people, and like she needs a purse and a cigarette. That's all you need if you want to do it as a theater piece.